quiet.
Please, it wasn't me. Look at the messages.
Who sent this?
I don't know, it's a blocked number.
It was them.
When Lena Hart took the witness stand, the courtroom went so quiet that even the air conditioning sounded guilty. Outside, camera shutters still clicked in frantic bursts behind the glass doors. The morning shows had been calling her the same thing for 3 weeks now. The waitress who married a blind billionaire. The opportunist. The woman who'd slipped a ring onto a vulnerable man's hand and somehow walked into control of one of the largest philanthropic trusts in the state. Nathan Vale, her husband's brother, sat at the petitioner's table in a charcoal suit, looking wounded in the expensive, practiced way men like him often did. He kept one hand on a yellow legal pad, as if grief required office supplies. "Mrs. Vale," the attorney said, "did your husband, Julian Vale, have the mental and physical capacity to alter the foundation charter 6 days before the board vote?" Lena looked at the judge first, then at the rows of strangers leaning forward to hear her ruin herself. "Yes," she said. Nathan's lawyer smiled a little. Too soon. Then Lena added, "And for the record, my husband was not blind when he signed it." The pen dropped out of somebody's hand. A reporter actually gasped. Nathan went white, not because he was shocked, but because he knew exactly what that sentence had cost her to say. If you're already sure you know what kind of woman Lena was, stay with her a little longer. The city got her wrong before it got anything else wrong. She had met Julian Vale in a room full of people pretending not to stare at him. It was a winter fundraiser for the Vale Institute, one of those glossy charity nights where the flowers looked flown in and the smiles looked rented. Lena wasn't supposed to be there as a guest. She was working. At the time, she restored old audio for the Institute's oral history archive, cleaning up recordings, cataloging interviews, preserving speeches and family tapes that money thought could outlive time. It was contract work, temporary, exactly the kind of job you take when your younger sister has tuition due, your landlord has stopped believing promises, and pride has become a luxury item. Julian had arrived late, tapping his cane once against the marble threshold before the room adjusted itself around him. People lowered their voices in that awful, sympathetic way. He was 38, newly famous for surviving the helicopter crash that had killed his father and taken most of his vision. Not all tabloids are smart, but all of them are cruel, and they had feasted on before and after photos like vultures arranging flowers. Lena was near the back table when the Institute director hurried over, hissing that the archival display in the West Gallery had malfunctioned and the audio wouldn't play. Julian wanted to hear one of the recordings of his mother before his speech. "Then fix it," Lena said. "That's why I'm asking you." She found him alone in the gallery, standing beside a glass case full of old cassette tapes and photographs he could no longer see. He had one hand resting flat on the edge of the display, as if touch could pin down what memory kept moving. "Mr. Vale?" she said. His mouth tightened. "Please don't tell me it's an easy fix. That phrase usually means someone else is about to fail calmly." Lena knelt beside the control box, unscrewed the panel with a butter knife she stole from catering and said, "It's not easy. The wiring is cheap." A beat. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. It wasn't a polished, rich man laugh. It was short, rusty, surprised into existence. When she got the recording playing, a woman's voice floated into the room, warm, elegant, a little breathless, speaking about the first school the foundation had built in a mining town where children studied by candlelight. Julian stood very still while his mother's voice filled the dark between them. "She always sounded like she was halfway into a secret," he said quietly. Lena should have left then. Instead, she said, "No." She sounded like someone who knew people only listened when she lowered her voice. He turned his head toward her. Most people, she later learned, tried to fill silence around him because they were uncomfortable with the idea that he might sit inside it better than they did. Lena had spent enough of her life being overlooked to know that silence was often more honest than speech. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lena Hart." "Are you always that blunt, Ms. Hart?" "Only when I'm working." "And when you're not?" She looked at the broken panel in her hands. "Then I'm tired." That was the first time he smiled at her like he'd been given something useful. For 6 weeks after that, their contact stayed ordinary. Or what passed for ordinary in a house with a private elevator, 6 full-time staff members, and an east wing nobody used because it reminded Julian of his father. He asked the Institute to extend her contract. Officially, he wanted help restoring a box of family tapes found in storage after his mother's death. Unofficially, he wanted someone in the house who didn't treat him like damaged glass or a boardroom weapon. Lena took the job because the pay was ridiculous, and because saying no to men like Julian Vale had never once lowered her utility bill. The estate was quieter than she expected. Wealth, she discovered, wasn't loud by default. Sometimes it was just insulated. Soundproof walls, thick carpets, doors that closed softly enough to hide what happened behind them. Julian worked from a study lined with braille labels and voice-activated screens. He hated help unless he asked for it. He hated pity even more. He could be cutting, impatient, impossible at 11 in the morning, and unexpectedly gentle at 2:30 when nobody was watching. He also had a habit of asking questions like he had no interest in small talk and every interest in weak points. "What did you give up to become this competent?" he asked her once, while she cleaned static from an old recording. "Sleep," she said. He waited. "My 20s, she added. Another time he said, "Why do you never take leftovers home from the kitchen?" "Because your chef plates fruit like it graduated from architecture school, and my sister will make fun of me." He laughed again, softer this time. "How old is she?" 19. "And you're paying for college. That obvious? No one works 2 jobs with your shoulders unless they're carrying someone." She wanted to resent how quickly he noticed things. Instead, she found herself telling him more than she meant to. About Mia, who was brilliant and reckless and changed majors the way other people changed playlists. About their mother, who had died 3 years earlier after a long illness that stripped her one memory at a time until even love had looked uncertain on her face. About how Lena had learned to become useful before she learned to become happy. Julian listened without interrupting. He was very good at that. It made people careless. In return, he gave away little pieces of himself, like a man paying an exact change. His father had been adored publicly, feared privately. His mother had built hospitals and schools and spent 20 years translating cruelty into civility. After the crash, Julian said, he discovered that grief and power attracted the same species of opportunist. "People think blindness makes you helpless," he told her one night on the terrace while rain ticked against the railing. "It doesn't. It makes other people reveal what they think helplessness deserves." Lena leaned back in the chair, listening to the storm. "And what do they think it deserves? Control, management, kindness that sounds like permission." He said it lightly, but there was old rage under it, packed down so tightly it had become almost elegant. She should have been careful then. She knows that now. But loneliness has its own gravity, and Julian's had begun pulling at hers. By spring, gossip had started before anything actually happened. She was seen leaving the estate too late. He was heard asking for her at the Institute when she was off-site. At a board luncheon, Nathan introduced her to someone as the archivist my brother has become mysteriously dependent on, smiling the whole time. Nathan and Julian were only a year apart in age and nothing alike in expression. Julian's stillness made you lean in. Nathan's smoothness made you check your wallet after he shook your hand. Yet he did love his brother in his own bruised, resentful way. That was the problem. Pure villains are easier to survive. Nathan believed he had earned what Julian had inherited. He believed years spent running public operations during Julian's recovery gave him a moral lien on the empire. He also believed Lena was temporary. So did Lena at first. Then Julian asked her to dinner in his own house, which should not have mattered, and somehow did. No staff, no pretense, just the two of them, and a bottle of wine she knew cost more than her monthly rent. "Is this a date?" she asked. "I'm blind, not cowardly." "You can be both." He smiled into his glass. "Then, yes, it's a date." He was not easy to love. He was proud, suspicious, and almost pathologically self-contained. When he felt cornered, he reached for sarcasm before honesty. When he was hurt, he went cold enough to make warmth feel foolish. He hated needing anyone, which meant he could make tenderness feel like a hostage negotiation. Lena was not easy either. She was stubborn, quick-tempered, too accustomed to being the dependable one. She mistook self-denial for integrity. She believed if she ever stopped earning her place in a room, she'd be asked to leave it. Maybe that was why they made sense. He liked that she argued with him. She liked that he never asked her to soften what was true. He learned the sound of her footsteps on stone and wood and carpet. She learned the difference between his public silence and his private one. He was patient with children, impatient with donors, terrified of losing more of himself than his eyesight had already taken. She was good in a crisis, terrible at rest, secretly afraid that if she ever let herself want too much, life would hear and punish her for it. He proposed on a Tuesday after a brutal board meeting she hadn't even attended. She found him in the music room, standing beside the piano his mother used to play. His tie was loose, his jaw was tight. "Marry me," he said. She stared. That's not even close to a normal way to begin this conversation. It's not a normal conversation. No, Julian, it's a psychiatric event. For one exhausted second, he almost smiled. Then he didn't. "I'm serious." She stepped closer, suddenly aware of how quiet the room was. "Why now?" He rested both hands on the back of a chair. "Because the board is trying to force a guardianship review. Because Nathan thinks I'm too unstable to retain final authority over the foundation. Because if they succeed, they'll turn the hospitals my mother built into branded monuments and call it efficiency." "And marriage fixes that?" "In legal terms, it complicates it." Lena felt something in her chest go thin and sharp. "So this is strategy." "It started as strategy," he said, too quickly. That was the first wound. He heard it the moment the words landed. She could tell by how still he became. "Lena, no, it's not just that." "Then what is it?" He drew in a breath that sounded like a man unused to pleading. "It's the fact that you are the only person in my life who speaks to me as if I am still a whole human being. It's the fact that when you enter a room, I stop bracing for impact. It's the fact that I have been afraid for months, and you are the only place that fear doesn't humiliate me." She looked down because if she kept looking at him, she might forgive him too fast. "Those are terrible proposal lines," she whispered. "I know. And you are manipulative." "Yes. And this might be the worst idea either of us has ever had." "That is very possible." She should have said no. Instead, she laughed once, shakily, like someone stepping onto thin ice, because going back seemed just as dangerous. They married at City Hall with 2 witnesses, 1 lawyer, and 6 photographers who somehow still found them on the courthouse steps. By sunset, the internet had decided what kind of woman she was. Comment sections are where empathy goes to die. Gold digger, Nurse with benefits. Social climber. She can keep the cane and the check. Mia called in tears after reading them. Lena told her not to. Then she locked herself in the guest bath and cried so hard she got a nosebleed. Julian found her sitting on the closed toilet lid with a towel pressed under her nose. "Tell me who said what," he said. "It doesn't matter. It matters if it hurts you." She almost laughed at the unfairness of that. "You don't get to be furious now. You knew this would happen." He reached for the counter, misjudged it slightly, corrected himself. Knowing a bullet exists doesn't make it painless. That should have been enough. It almost was. The marriage itself began awkwardly, then strangely tender. They learned the humiliating logistics of intimacy, the little frictions of sharing space with someone who'd only ever lived alone in his own mind. He left books in stacks that made sense only to him. She sang under her breath while making coffee and denied it when caught. He touched her face sometimes as if memorizing architecture. She slept lighter than he did and woke at every bad dream he pretended not to have. It might have become simple, if simple had ever been available to them. The first crack appeared in June. Lena came into the library after midnight carrying tea. Julian was by the window. Nothing strange there, but as she crossed the room, lightning flashed over the garden, and he turned, not toward the sound, but toward the light. She stopped. He must have felt it. "What?" She set the cups down carefully. "What color is the teapot?" Silence. Then, very softly, he said, "Lena." Her throat closed. "What color?" A long breath. "Blue." The words split the room open. She didn't remember deciding to step back, but suddenly there was space between them and it felt earned. "How long?" He didn't answer quickly enough. "How long, Julian?" Partial recovery began before the wedding. She stared at him until her face hurt. "Before?" "Yes." "How much can you see?" "Shapes, light, movement, some color. Enough to navigate familiar rooms. Enough to read large print at close range on good days. Enough to know exactly what you were doing." His face flinched then, not dramatically, just once, as if honesty had finally found bone. He told her the rest in fragments. Experimental treatment, limited return, doctors warning it might plateau. Nathan shifting money through shell contracts tied to the foundation's construction arm. Board members behaving differently when they believed Julian could neither see documents nor read expressions. The longer he kept pretending, the more careless they became. "And me?" Lena asked. "What was I to that plan?" At first he looked ashamed. Then he made the mistake of looking practical. "Protection," he said. The word hit harder than a scream. She turned away, one hand over her mouth. He came closer. "And then more than that." "Don't." "It's true. You let them call me a parasite so no one would look at you. I thought I could control the damage." She laughed then, a terrible little sound. "That is exactly the kind of thing powerful men say right before they ruin someone else's life." He reached for her wrist. She pulled back before he touched skin. "My mother spent the last year of her life pretending she recognized me when she didn't," Lena said. Her voice shook, but only once. "Do you know what that did to me? Do you know what it costs to realize the person you loved was acting because she thought the truth would hurt less?" He closed his eyes. "I never meant to make you feel that. You didn't mean to. You chose to." She moved out the next morning. Not far, just to the apartment she'd kept for Mia, who was away all summer. But distance is rarely measured by mileage. Julian sent messages. She ignored them. He sent flowers. She gave them to the neighbor downstairs whose husband had just left. He sent one voicemail that began with, "I deserve your silence," and ended without asking for forgiveness. 3 weeks later, Nathan invited her to lunch. That alone should have warned her. Nathan only met people privately when witnesses were inconvenient. He chose a restaurant with white tablecloths and waiters who placed water like ritual offerings. He was kind to staff in the same measured way politicians kiss babies. "I'm worried about him," he said after the menus were taken. Lena almost stood up immediately. Nathan raised both hands. "Please, hear me out. I've heard you before, usually through gritted teeth." A flicker of something real crossed his face. Tiredness, maybe. Or envy stretched into old shape. Julian has always believed suffering makes him uniquely qualified to govern everyone around him. And you've always believed proximity to him makes you underrated. He gave a humorless smile. "You see why he likes you." "I'm not sure he knows what liking means." Nathan looked down at his glass. "No, I suppose he doesn't." For the first time, she saw the brother under the rival. The boy who had spent years being second in a house built to worship firstborn sons. It did not excuse what he had done, but it made him legible. "He's preparing something," Nathan said. "A board purge. If he goes through with it now, the lenders will panic. The hospitals could lose expansion funding. I'm trying to stop him from burning the whole thing down just to prove he still can hold the match." "Then stop stealing from it." Nathan's jaw hardened. "He told you that." "He didn't have to." Nathan leaned in. "Lena, listen to me. Julian lies best when he's scared. If he told you he loved you, I'm sure some part of him believed it. But you were never the only one he used." She left without finishing lunch. That night, she finally listened to the voicemail Julian had sent on the first day she moved out. His voice was rougher than she remembered. No performance in it. No strategy she could hear. "I keep trying to decide which part of this was the worst," he said. "The lie itself, or the fact that I told myself I was protecting you by carrying it alone. That sounds noble until you say it out loud, and then it just sounds like arrogance with good tailoring. I did love you. I do. I realize that may now be the least credible sentence in the English language. But if you need one true thing from me, let it be that." She sat on the edge of Mia's bed after it ended, phone trembling in her hand. Love, she was learning, did not turn deception into misunderstanding. It only made the damage more specific. 2 days later, Julian collapsed during a board rehearsal. Not dramatic, not cinematic. A spike in pressure behind the healing eye, severe vertigo, a fall that split his cheek against the desk. But by the time Lena reached the hospital, Nathan had already called 3 reporters and 1 emergency board meeting. Julian was awake when she entered his room, a bandage curving white across his face. "You came," he said. "I'm furious with myself for it." "Reasonable." She moved to the window so he couldn't mistake pity for softness. "Nathan is petitioning to suspend your voting authority." "Yes." "And if they succeed?" "They sell off the land under the North Campus. My mother's pediatric hospital gets folded into a private network within a year." Lena turned back. "Why didn't you tell the board the truth?" He looked at the blanket over his legs. "Because if I admitted I'd concealed medical improvement while signing executive documents, they'd call it fraud and bury the financial investigation under my scandal." She hated that he was right. He lifted his head toward her. "I made you collateral. I know that." "That's a very neat word for what you did." He nodded once, accepting it. Something in her softened then, not because he deserved it, but because pain had finally stripped him of his talent for control. He looked like a man exhausted by being dangerous. "I don't know what to do with you," she said. "Neither do I." That was the first honest conversation they'd had in weeks. The hearing was set for Monday. By Sunday evening, Lena had made her decision. Not for him, exactly. For truth. For the hospital where her mother had once received care she couldn't afford. For the school wing Julian's mother funded in Lena's old neighborhood. For the fact that Nathan's version of stewardship was just greed in a tie clip. In the courtroom, after the first shock settled into whispers, Julian's attorney called for a recess. The judge refused. Too much had already been dragged into daylight to pretend delicacy now. Nathan's lawyer rose. "Mrs. Vale, are you asking this court to believe your husband deceived the public, his board, his physicians, and his own wife for months?" "No," Lena said. "I'm telling you he deceived them." Murmurs again. "And yet you stand by the legality of his actions?" "I stand by the evidence." She looked toward the clerk. "My husband recorded 3 board sessions after his treatment began. Audio and corresponding financial files were delivered to counsel Friday morning." Nathan's head snapped toward his attorney. Lena continued, each word steadier than she felt. "Those recordings capture Mr. Nathan Vale discussing the diversion of foundation construction funds through 2 subcontracting entities tied to his personal holdings. They also capture him describing my marriage as, and I quote, a useful circus to keep the old donors staring at the wrong act." The judge adjusted his glasses. Nathan actually whispered, "You gave her the files?" to Julian, as if betrayal were intolerable only when directed at him. Julian sat at the defense table with his cane beside him. His cheek was still bruised. He did not look triumphant. He looked tired enough to tell the truth forever. When court resumed after a brief review, Nathan's certainty was gone. His attorney spoke less. The judge ordered a forensic audit, suspended the petition against Julian's authority, and referred the diversion evidence for criminal review. It should have felt like victory. Court victories rarely do. They feel more like collapse with paperwork. Outside, the press surged like floodwater. Questions hit from every angle. "Mrs. Vale, did you marry him for money? Mr. Vale, were you ever really blind? Was the marriage real?" Julian stopped on the courthouse steps. For once, he didn't let security move him along. He turned toward the microphones, not perfectly, not theatrically, just enough. "I was blind," he said. "Then I was less blind, and more frightened than I cared to admit. I lied about the degree of my recovery. I lied to my board, to the public, and most unforgivably, to my wife. She did not marry me for money. If anything, marriage to me cost her peace, privacy, and a fair opinion from strangers. Those debts are mine." Lena looked at him, startled. He kept going. No script, no polish. "My wife loved me while the world mistook dignity for weakness and dependence for emptiness. I repaid that love with control. Whatever happens next to me professionally, I earned it. What happens to her should not be decided by people who only liked this story when they thought she was the villain." For once, the cameras had nothing clever to say. The months after were not romantic. That mattered. Nathan resigned before the audit was complete and was later charged. The foundation survived. The hospital land stayed protected. Commentators found newer scandals. The city moved on, as cities do, leaving individuals to live with what public fascination only visits. Julian moved into the smaller guest house on the estate and began actually learning the skill he had always imitated: honesty before crisis. He told donors when his vision fluctuated. He told staff when he was afraid. He stopped making silence do the work of confession. Lena did not come back right away. She visited for meetings, for legal signatures, once to pick up books she'd left on a shelf beside his bed. They spoke carefully at first, like people handling glass after someone's already bled. Trust did not return with apologies. It returned, if it returned at all, with repetition, with unglamorous proof, with him saying, "I don't know," instead of inventing certainty, with her admitting when anger was covering grief, with both of them learning that love without humility curdles into management. The second time he asked her to marry him, it was nearly a year later. Not because they had divorced, they hadn't, but because, as he said, "I did the first one so badly, it feels ethically necessary to try again." They were standing in the nearly finished children's music wing at the hospital bearing his mother's name. Sunlight spilled across the new floor in long, warm bands. He could see enough now to make out the shape of her smile. "No board crisis?" she asked. "No." "No legal strategy?" "None." "No hidden surveillance plan?" He winced. "That joke will haunt me until death, won't it?" "Yes." "Fair." He took a breath. "Then let me say this right. I don't need saving from my family, my board, or myself. I need the chance to love you in a way that doesn't reduce love to usefulness. I am still learning how. I may embarrass us both repeatedly, but if you stay, I will stay honestly." Lena looked around the half-painted room where children would someday learn noise before fear, rhythm before diagnosis. She thought of the courthouse, the tabloid photos, the voicemail she'd listened to in the dark. She thought of the man who had wounded her out of fear and then, finally, laid down the weapon. "You don't get a clean slate," she said. "I know. You get this one, the real one, scuffed edges and all." He smiled, small and helpless and human. "That sounds better." So she stepped close enough for him to touch her face, and this time when he did, it wasn't to map what he couldn't trust. It was to honor what he finally could. Years later, people still told the story wrong at parties. They always would. That's the trouble with a good scandal. It survives facts by being easier to repeat. But the children in the music wing didn't know the headlines. They only knew the man with the cane who sometimes sat on the floor to listen, and the woman who corrected his timing when he clapped off-beat on purpose, just to make them laugh. And maybe that was enough, because in the end, the city learned what it should have known from the beginning. The woman they called greedy had given up the safety of being misunderstood, and the man they called helpless had been the one hiding in plain sight. What would you have done if the person you loved told the truth only after the lie had already changed your life?